Bonjour à tous, bienvenue.
Hello everyone. Welcome to this roundtable dedicated to ending poverty. At first, we wanted to speak about poverty throughout the world, but now we're going to focus on poverty in France, how to remedy, what solutions can we find, what solutions can we bring to remedy poverty. Just a few figures, and then I'll give the floor directly to Pierre Jacquet. The figure, which is quite surprising, and maybe to be taken cautiously, it was 38% in 1990, 8.5 in 2024. That doesn't mean that it's not increasing. I will give the floor to Pierre Jacquet, professor at Ponts et Chaussées and a member of Le Cercle des économistes. Thank you. So, how to remedy poverty? That's the topic of poverty. It's not the first time we talk about it. Every year in Aix, there's a roundtable on how to end poverty, which proves that poverty remains a topical subject, that the strategies adopted are not enough in volume, in nature, in any type of format. But it shouldn't be a way to continue to have empty words without concrete actions. So we have to think about concrete actions that are already set up to help poor populations. The first subject that I would like to address and introduce to you, how can we define poverty? And I will not dwell too much on a definition which is quite widespread, which is the monetary definition. As Pierre said earlier when he gave world figures, it is a version of monetary poverty, which allows to measure and follow up poverty and to see whether progress has been made each year or if there's an upturn of poverty as we saw with the COVID pandemics. I would rather turn towards a more conceptual definition, relying on two notions. First, access to essential needs. That means food, health, and education. And the second notion, inequalities or relative poverty, if you please, which is a permanent topic and it will remain so. That's the distribution of income, which is the implementation of transformation economy, which will have an impact, undoubtedly, on the allocation of income. On these two aspects, I think we would say that we are bankrupt in a way, that we are really the last in ranking. First, because there's a moral challenge. That means the persistence of poverty hotspots in the world and the problem of food safety throughout the world. I think it's a scandal, in my opinion, that we have spent 3 decades to set as a target to end hunger in the world, and for a decade, food insecurity has kept on ramping up. And this growth of food insecurity predates the COVID pandemic, and then we had the Ukraine war, which didn't help anything. So we actually had an upturn of food insecurity in the low-income countries. 70% suffer from food insecurity, and 30% are in serious food insecurity, which goes beyond, far beyond the amount of dollars per capita which the population might have every day. So despite all the targets that have been set and the Millennium Goals, this was not enough to curb this phenomenon. There's also an economic challenge, namely the spontaneous granularity hasn't been made true. And we see it in France. We have inequalities that stabilized. They plateaued at a low level, and now they picked up again at higher levels. And for me, this is very important, and that shows that financial capitalism does not fill the gap. And we have to work on the side of the state, but also on the private sector side. And we have less and less resources when it comes to budget, because with a lot of constructs. And if I wanted to be provocative, I think we expect from the state so much without taking too much from the wealthy, and we can't make any offsetting on the population. So this doesn't work. And if we want to end poverty, we need to change the economic paradigm beyond these beautiful ideas of sustainable and green growth, which are concepts that are in full trend right now. To wrap up, there's a last challenge, the political challenge. Managing public policy and green transition, as we have spoken in the past, economy, this requires a social consensus that is stable and robust. However, we are facing a deep crisis, and the digging of inequalities, the powerlessness of public policies to curb these problems, to have a social and environmental and climatic transition, this weakens the credibility of the economic model in which we live. And we have a situation where we have the society that puts on the spotlight some issues, and then the political world that seems to work in a different universe that doesn't talk about the real subjects. And this dichotomy is related to our economic model, which has made it come true. We have revenue and efficiency and distribution on the other side, and we should think about the two at once together. It should be a permanent objective, and economic policy should be assessed as to its efficiency, but not only, but also when it comes to ending poverty, inequalities, and taking care of poverty and population segments that are highly impacted by the economic policy. So we should look into what we should do to end poverty and address this problem. Thank you. We are with Augustin de ROMANET de BEAUNE, Caroline CHEVÉ, Patrice DOURET, Nicolas JOLY, and Augustin. What do you think about this aggravation of poverty? We have 5 million of poor people in France, and what Pierre Jacquet said earlier on is very interesting. We have the absolute and the relative poverty. What can you say about this? Thank you, Pierre. Thank you to both Pierres. So indeed, we talk about 800 million and 1 billion poor in the world, and 9 million in France if we take the most widespread indicator, which has a living standard which is the average one, and we talk about 1,200 euros per month. It has improved greatly in the world and France, but it has been going down recently. I'm not going to talk about the figures that Pierre Jacquet said earlier. What we see is that since COVID, and with the growth of, and with the wars breaking out in Somalia, South Sudan, in Ukraine, we have 70 million poor in addition in the world, and the threats on medical aid, policies related to Donald Trump's decisions will take a toll on vaccination of children and the fight against AIDS. That's worldwide. In France, the poverty rate, measured by the fact to have 60%, to have less than 60% of the average income, we stood at 12% of the population before. It went up to 14%. So two observations as an introduction. It concerns the distribution of wealth. It concerns job market, but also social inclusion, which is actually hampered by increased poverty. What can a business leader do? Two observations. First, public powers recognize that they are not the only ones to have some influence on a few fields. I'm talking about caregivers, I'm talking about health. Companies actually deal with that. And when it comes to poverty, you have the Interministerial Delegation for the Prevention of Poverty that published a manual to companies, and I would recommend all the business owners to look into it, because corporations are a venue of proximity, and that could actually help to curb poverty. I'm not going to quote Duflo, but in companies, we can be a laboratory for new experiments. And they recommend to business owners to detect people that are in situation of poverty. For instance, when someone asks you for some money ahead of time, we have to pay attention, we have to say yes, and we can see if we can't help them in terms of accommodation, for parenting arrangements, and so on and so forth. Another example is illiteracy. We talked about the fight against illiteracy. It was a priority. And we realized that amongst the cleaning ladies and gentlemen, we could see that they could not fill a CARF form, and if they didn't have someone in their family to do so, they could not have access to welfare aid. And so illiteracy is a problem also to be recognized and pinpointed. So amongst the large statistics of ending of poverty issues saying that poverty is actually being curbed, well, we have two challenges ahead of us. First, the disengagement of America that actually takes a toll on dozens of millions of people worldwide. And in a country like France, the question of ending poverty requires to work on prevention and not on what I would call ex-ante action. So they have decided to focus on prevention with enhanced action, and I will talk about it later. Thank you. And it's very important to say, because I'm following up on Pierre Jacquet, who was talking about the state as a leitmotiv, as someone being too adamant. But maybe we could talk about the corporate world. What about trade unions? Because trade unions' perspective is important, and I thank Caroline Chevret to be here. There's a specific feature, a prism of public services, and when it comes to poverty, they look at poverty in a different way. Often, we say civil servants are sheltered from poverty. They will never be poor. They're protected. They're in a safe haven. But it's not the case. Actually, you have an outlook on poverty that is quite specific and different to the others. Yes. Thank you for this introduction and talking about it from the get-go. As trade unionists, we are embedded in the public service sector, FSU. It's the first federation of education, but also we work on territorial services that are directly addressing poverty issues and trying to respond to poverty. But we also have another concern, which is that of the staff. And poverty also concerns staff members of the civil service. Sometimes they are civil servants, and often they are contract-based employees, often women that have part-time employees on an imposed basis and that are not well paid. But what I could say about this, the input I could bring on this is these jobs that are directly in contact with poverty, because the public services in France have a double hat. They have to meet the needs, the immediate needs of those that are facing poverty. That's the role of social workers, whether they are in councils of département or in the board of schools, but also to implement public policies that target to end poverty in a good or less good way for 2 or 3 generations. And this is what we keep in mind, because we have to keep in mind that we have young people in our classrooms that need to get out of poverty when they reach the adult age. You've talked about global figures, but it's also 3 million of children that are under the threshold of poverty. 1 out of 5 children living in families, 40%, sometimes more, when they are in special neighborhoods, underprivileged neighborhoods. And it is fundamental to get to know that, because that's the lack of access to fundamental needs. And that weighs upon their possibility to accomplish the public service missions. It seems obvious, but it is important to highlight it when a child only eats once, namely at the canteen, or doesn't go to the canteen at noon because the money is required to pay the rent, when they sometimes sleep in a car, well, that's part of the things that would prevent the kids from studying properly, and that would drive them even further into poverty in an evil circle. And this is what we have to face. Sometimes we have such poverty that we cannot fulfill our duties. I'm talking about damage caused on health of kids. 18% of young people are overweight, and there's a percentage which is even higher in underprivileged neighborhoods, because quality of food is important. It's important to give some concrete elements on what could happen when we have to face poverty among public services, with the willingness to get out of it, obviously. The management of public services has clear values. They want to get out of relative poverty. We talk about inequalities, addressing inequalities, but we have extreme difficulties and obstacles that we do not know anymore how to overcome them. I'm talking about the kid sleeping in a car before going to school. This is a horrible example. Or the one not going to canteen because money is used to pay the rent. Nicolas, JOLY from Icade. Is this the real poverty pattern? We have this problem of livelihood, accommodation, poverty, schooling. The thing is, not everyone has a roof above their heads, right? Yes. It's not always true that everyone has a roof over their heads, and it's for 70 years we've had this crisis and we see that it's actually a topical subject, and poverty affects everyone and has an impact on every other subject, and we can see a population that is getting poorer and poorer, and housing is more and more a problem. Housing is 22% of income. It increased by 50% in 10 years. Before it was 10% of the income. So, as Caroline said, it actually weighs upon the rest as to filling and essential needs. And this is why we have new phases of poverty related to housing. I'm going to talk about the example that we saw with Adoma, which is the branch of CDC Habitat dedicated to housing and emergency accommodation. And we could see that we have a poverty that affects more and more young people and more female population. Traditionally, we had more senior people, elderly people. We have young people accounting for 13%. It's 18 to 30 now. It's a new entrance out of 3 that is actually relating to young people. Before, for women, it was 15%. Now it's 1 out of 4 people. And 1 out of 3 young female in the population. So things are speeding up. And to give you another illustration, beyond extreme poverty, you have the issue of social housing, which we're talking about 2.7 million people that are on the waiting list for social housing. That's an increase by 50% spanning 10 years. We were talking about the COVID effect, but since COVID, this has been ramping up with more 6% every year. And this has an impact. And it is widespreading to other issues. So we have problems relating to accessibility to housing. People stay in social housing, then cannot manage to get out of social housing to manage to pay rent in private residence or to buy property to become owners. And so you have a waiting list becoming bigger and bigger, and that actually widens the social gap. So when we talk about student housing, it's a crisis within the crisis. So we often quote the examples of strong figures where you have 600 applications in Paris, up to 1,400 if we believe PAP, and we have to be closer to schools, so the conditions are stricter. And then you have bad housing. You have no choice in the housing. And if you cannot manage to find housing, this has an impact on labor market. Because if you're a student and you cannot find the right and proper housing, you are on the sideline. That means that you will feed those that are without job, without training, without academic achievements, and you're going to be a part of the waiting list, and you're going to be a new face of poverty. So more than ever, the housing is an essential need, and it's actually an important factor of poverty. So, les Restos du Coeur, in 1980 on Europa, Coluche created this soup kitchen for everyone with the idea that one day it would stop. But unfortunately, not only has it not stopped, but it is actually getting worse. Thank you. It's going to be 40 years, the 26th of September 87. We all heard that 85. So if maybe they said we could create this new soup kitchen, and they distributed 8,500,000 lunches. And this year, it's 162 million. So when we talk about poverty in our country, it accounted for 1.3 million people. 5 years ago, it was 875,000 people. When we look at these figures, remember, we're talking about men, women, kids. And we have seen this worsening, as you recalled it earlier, since COVID. COVID was not a booming point of poverty because there were a lot of breaks, but it was an aggravation of all situations that were already in existence, because they were right on the cliff of precarity, and that was actually a turning point. And for going towards lasting poverty, you're talking about 23, 22, we're talking about geopolitical crisis. All crises have an impact on the most vulnerable groups. 2008, it was 25% uptake of people being sheltered, and this level of increase, we saw it in 22, 23 in a few months' time. 200 people joined the Restos du Coeur and solidarity associations. And the public is the same as 40 years ago. When Coluche created the Restos du Coeur, let's remind us that we had 200,000 jobless people, and now we have even more. And we were talking about the new poor. Now they're not brand new. They're just many more. So this is the idea of relative poverty. Yes, absolutely. So we have 50% of the people that we are welcoming under the age of 25. So youth is a real problem, and childhood is important. We don't want to make them the adults of tomorrow going to the soup kitchen tomorrow. So that's not the typical profile. You wonder what happened to you. And they said that I can't make it anymore. I couldn't say the typical profile, because people are coming to us and say, please help me, take my hand, so that I can get out of it, that I can go through. And we see people that are retired, that had to use out all their savings during the crisis to help their grandchildren. And they were not at the soup kitchen anymore, and they're coming back again. And then we see also the kids with problems related to employment, to health, to housing. And the difficulty of associations is to play by ear, because they have no certainties whatsoever. So at first it was a small track. If someone has a small track or a car they're not using, maybe we can bring books and so on. So you started with a small association, and now you're a full-scope association, 75,000 volunteers full-time. We also have people helping us, and 2,340 venues in France everywhere. Yes. And since COVID, we have also developed we have traveling sites, because when you have nothing to put in your fridge, then you can't actually you can't drive, because you can't pay for the oil. And this is the problem with poverty. It's the boys next door. This is what Nicolas said earlier. Nicolas, the one paying, but he's paying for the retired people. He's paying for so many, and he's taxed more and more. So Nicolas, who's paying, will go to the soup kitchen at one point, because he can't make both ends meet at the end of the month anymore. And this is why you see it through and through. So we have talked about poverty specifically in France. Now we still have half an hour to talk about the solutions. We have the solutions that are already in place. Nicolas Jacquet talked about it, and I thank him for this. Augustin said that companies have different programs via CSR. There was a round table on this before. This is also impacted. And it's not that they can, but they have to act. It's a duty to act. I don't know if Pierre Jacquet should take the floor again, or are you there as just a censor? No, if you want me to take the floor, I shall. Can you say a few words on the solutions that are visible today, and where should we head ourselves to reach that?
I don't think there are a lot of solutions. What I believe in is understanding the problem and solutions. Actions come next. We can all agree here that we need to reduce poverty, but if we don't agree how to go forward, we won't take many steps forward. So, to respond to what was said about the Restos du Coeur, I'd be interested to hear what struggles you have to put that in place. I'm delighted to hear that you've got so many volunteers. Is that a constraint to your future growth, and what is your development strategy? I would like not to have to talk about development and growth, because we're a charity. The idea that our founder had was to see poverty ended quickly. But over the last few years, and particularly since COVID, we've understood that we needed to strengthen our organization in order to protect the 1.3 million people who are counting on this. So there are key issues. The financial issues are significant. We're highly dependent on public funding, not just the state, but on people and businesses who support us. A lot of our donors are not hugely well off, but they're very generous, and when they're struggling to buy their shopping at the supermarket, they'll think twice about making a gift. And then volunteers, we've got a lot of historical volunteers, like all charities, and that needs to move forward. And in order to continue all of our work beyond our food aid, and perhaps I'll be able to talk about the support activities that we offer as well, our challenge is to recruit and continue to train volunteers. Well, let's not talk about solutions. Let's talk about actions, current actions and future actions. We've got 27 minutes exactly. So, Augustin de Romanet, are there some public policies which are effective in ending poverty, and how things working and what we do better? Let's talk about the world and talk about France as well. In terms of combating poverty around the world, I'd point you to an article in the French newspaper Libération from Thursday last week. Mr. Banerjee works at MIT. He's married to Esther Duflo, who's a minister in France. He said, as development economists, we haven't talked enough about the importance of multilateral cooperation. Given the threats from Donald Trump, economists are realizing that things which seem obvious, reducing poverty around the world through multilateral action, France has obviously played a role, because Jacques Chirac created the air ticket tax, which enabled us to meet one of the Sustainable Development Objectives, which is the near eradication of AIDS. So with respect to multilateral action, we need to be very careful that we don't forget the issues here. Within our companies, we have around 5 to 10% of our staff who are in a situation of poverty. Between 8 and 10%, 16% are digital illiterates. So that's a key thing. What Esther Duflo said in terms of capacity for action needs to be used for not only for multilateral aid but also for domestic aid. So 5 criteria. Efficiency is not just about how much but about how. Second point, testing and experimenting is very useful. If you take the example of vaccination in India, take 3 populations. One population where there's no incentive, 6% of children are vaccinated. Take another part of the population which sees a vaccination truck coming around every month, 18% of the population. And if you see there's a sample of the population who get a bag of lentils for every child that is vaccinated. It's a non-monetary incentive. 38% of the population are vaccinated. There are counterintuitive strategies you need to know about. In India, poor people would prefer to fund a wedding for social prestige than to fund latrine. Fourth point, we need simple, easy solutions. And fifth point, we need local buy-in. That's my key thing. That was my second point. My third observation is that the poverty reduction policies developed in France since 2018 are good policies. There's some reports by the ministerial delegation, and we're focusing more on prevention than on cure. That's a good thing, but there's a lot more work to be done in terms of ensuring that local authorities become responsible. One of the new things is a local rollout of policy. I want to talk about a very banal issue. In the Middle Ages, there were very few poor people in a village, because when you have close relations with the people who live around you, you can't really be homeless or hungry or lacking in education. But when you live in big cities and agglomerations, there are significant risks of loneliness and lack of personal relationship. I don't want to take too long. I'll answer other questions later. I didn't have to cut you off this time. That's a bit new for you, Augustin. Nicolas, JOLY, when we talk about housing, you said that there were 2.5 million French people waiting for social housing. That's a lot. It's actually 2.7 million. Yes, it's massive. So what are we doing about that? There are 2 types of response. So there are individual responses. As businesses, we have responsibilities, but there's another level, the ecosystem that we work in. Other companies, groups, on the local or national level. Let me give you a few examples. What are we doing on an individual level? I can talk about how we need to unblock the housing pathway for people who can't find their way onto the housing ladder. So there are some initiatives that we're starting, new forms of ownership, such as the solidarity tenancy. It enables people to become homeowners for 30 to 40% less than if they were buying the whole property. It's perhaps a new approach in France, but we're seeing that in some of the development operations we're running. We've started working with a local organization in the Saint-Denis area, north of Paris, and we created our own foundation in Chambéry as well. We're starting a new project there. So that's the first type of initiative we can think about. Another thing is that we need to build in inclusion for all in any property development program. When we did, we talked about Adoma, which is a subsidiary of the Caisse des Dépôts, focusing on emergency housing, and who sees every day these new faces of poverty. And in the Olympic athletes village, we have developed new housing up to the same standards of housing that we build out elsewhere. The same quality in terms of energy use, energy efficiency. I was also talking about work on an ecosystem level. We need to work hand in hand with housing associations. So within Icade, we're part of a bigger group that I just mentioned, the Caisse des Dépôts, which funds 2 houses in 5 in France, the biggest stakeholder in social housing in France. So there's a real active work that we do in combating poverty there. We're also an investor. We have clients that have offices that are taking some initiatives. I'm thinking of AXA in the La Défense area near Paris. It's working with a company called Bureau Solidaire. So offices that are not used at night can be used as temporary housing for homeless people who haven't got a roof over their heads. So these types of initiatives are things that we like to encourage. We're working as well with the authorities in order to try to enable greater access to private housing stock with some thinking that's going on within the housing ministry about how we can increase access to private-owned properties. There are French people who want to invest in buy-to-let. They're aware of the housing crisis, and we want to give them ways they can do that. Pierre DOURET, the role of the Restos du Coeur charity is not just as a food provider. You offer human resources, perhaps some psychological support. Is it a new role? Well, it's not completely new. At the moment, the charity was founded. We talked about inclusion. We don't want the people who come and knock on our door to stay with us for a long time. So we've provided support activities to help people alongside the food assistance, which is the first step on the ladder. We help people looking for jobs. We help them to look for schools for their kids. We help them with their self-esteem. We try to make clothes available to people who are very much in need, help them to write CVs, perhaps get their hair cut by a volunteer hairdresser. That might help them to get training or an interview with an employer. All of these aspects will enable us to help people who are struggling to get back on track for a normal life. And the other thing that we do is 100 employability workshop. A lot of that focuses on fruit and vegetable growing without chemical inputs. We're taking responsibility in terms of environmental transition, and so that represents around 15% of the food that we give out in our network. So we wanted to build up new partnerships with the Public Employment Service, with the Social Security Organization, in order to help people in difficulty find new pathways into work. Caroline Chevré, in terms of public policy, we seen changes to mean that children have to go to nursery school from 3 years old. What do you see in terms of public policy and poverty? If we focus in on education, I think we're at a turning point today. The relationship of the French population with the education system, which has been inspired by the national resistance, but which has rolled out greater in the 1970s with a form of social compromise. This approach considers that we don't want an education system that would lead to poor schools for the poor and high-performing education system for the rich. There's a kind of compromise that was built from the 70s onwards, which was embodied in the 1989 Act on Schooling, and that's led to political choices in favour of a dynamic education system whereby the same targets are set for all children, for all young people, and the aim was for 80% of people to access the baccalaureate and 50% of people to get a bachelor's degree. All of this has led to an education system which gives more to those who have less. That's been the philosophy until fairly recently, I would say, in France, in particular with priority education policies. When we talk about priority education policies, we often think it's focusing on tough neighborhoods in cities, but it also focuses on rural areas that are poorer. And the most recent map of priority education with primary schools and secondary schools are supported goes back to 2016. If we think about the way that society and the economy has changed, what we can see is there is no longer focus on priority education in certain parts of the country, and the high schools are no longer part of the school, as if education stopped at the age of 15, 16 in France. We are at a turning point today because it will be vital to come back to the idea of a public service whereby the targets are the same for everyone. Currently, we're seeing private education growing exponentially. There's a recent bill that's been brought before the Parliament just a few days ago, which should enable private higher education establishments to issue degrees and diplomas. And you talked about the decision to make nursery education mandatory from 3 years old, but 90% of children were already going to nursery school from 3 years old. But there was a correlation of this decision. It allowed local authorities to fund private nurseries, and that wasn't part of their competencies. Yes, there are always side effects, aren't there? There was no big effect on school attendance for 3 years old children. Children attending school from 3 years old is a really great way to lift people out of poverty. However, what it did do was allow funding for private nurseries. Currently, state nurseries can welcome all the pupils, so it's not particularly beneficial for society to have private nurseries developing to separate people up. So we're taking resources out of state education, which needs extra resourcing, and we need to focus on the public sector. Let's take the next 10-12 minutes to focus on some of what has been said. I want to give the floor back to Augustin de ROMANET about reinventing public policy. I had a rather disruptive thing to say. I think it's really important to have policies focused on objectives and targets. The objective of 80% of pupils having the baccalaureate is a tragedy. Higher education degree, 50% target is a tragedy. Someone with 5 years of higher education has less of a good outlook than someone with 3 years in higher education 20 years ago. It's a tragedy. What would you say? The problem is that the means weren't provided. We've never given secondary school pupils from poor backgrounds the means that were given to the middle-class students in the 1970s. So, yes, we've increased difficulties. You're asking for the roots, the deep-lying causes. Within the ADP group, when I was there, we were helping an association called 1001 mots, which says that the development capabilities of a child will vary widely depending on how many words they heard between the ages of 0 and 3 years. The idea is to get local authorities and to encourage parents to read their kids' stories so they can hear words. Children who are always sat in front of a tablet or a screen will have a different experience to the child who has had stories read to them every day. The child who's heard stories will have heard 2 million more words than the child who hasn't had stories read to them. So we need to go to the root of things. That's the first thing I would say. And all of the work carried out by this charity is a really good thing. Second observation, we need to get ready for the tidal wave of AI. It's going to be something that turns education upside down. I don't know what the solutions are going to be, but we're going to need to do with AI what the Indians did with the telephone. The Indians went from no telephones to mobile phones. They talk about the way they leapfrogged the landline phones phase. We need to leapfrog children from poor backgrounds who don't get stories read to them and have a real difficulty in education by using AI. What does that mean? We need to keep teaching humanities, philosophy, critical thinking, all of these skills that are going to be vital in order to compensate for the dumbing down that we're going to find when ChatGPT writes your essay or your dissertation. That's an issue which is going to give rise to lots of doctoral research in educational science. I think we need to rethink education, particularly for those who are struggling the most with reading, and take into account the impact of AI. Third point, my last one, is that one of the things we're lacking in society is a sense of responsibility. No one takes responsibility for anything, and in terms of poverty, we need to think about local responsibility. Each one of us should feel accountable for people living on the same staircase, in the same block of flats, or in the local area. So that people living alongside us can find a pathway forward. Thank you. People are responding warmly to your final point. Luc Julia recently said before the French Senate he created Siri on chat or on the Apple iOS, and it's really interesting to hear what he said. You could see it online. He explains exactly how ChatGPT is dumbing us all down and how important it will be to combat this. And I think with what you said about 0 to 3 years old, someone said to Albert Einstein, and the mother said to him, "My child wants to learn French." Albert Einstein said, "How old is the child?" The mother said, 3 years. He said, "It's too late." So that illustrates what you said. Caroline CHEVÉ is rolling her eyes. You obviously don't share this opinion. You're the next person to take the floor. Are we living in an old-fashioned world? Do we need to throw everything out and start again? What would you say to businesses? We talk a lot about the state, the welfare state, but can things be changed with the participation and the participation of businesses? Well, I rolled my eyes because not everyone is a teacher, not everyone is an educator. It's not too late, clearly, to train and educate a child who is 3 years old. Sometimes things are exaggerated, and that might even be the case for Albert Einstein from time to time. We need to consider that education is an absolutely crucial factor for getting out of poverty. When we take into account the fact that education is not just what happens in the classroom, it's also about everything that happens around the classroom, outside of the classroom, everything that means that a child can come into class in the morning in a position where they are ready to learn. The use of screens is a key issue. This kind of magical thinking around artificial intelligence, providing cheaper options for education, that would mean putting kids in front of a screen even longer, so that would be a real challenge. So probably we will need a real change of policy in order to think differently about equality policies. There will be no way out of policy without thinking about the reduction of inequalities and focus on a future where equality really means something. Nicolas, JOLY. One thing that we haven't talked about is having an address. Having an address is important for a bank account, having a mobile phone. It's really important in 2025, and that's something that you're working on. Yes, indeed. Having an address, a roof over one's head is an essential need, and we've seen how much that can have an impact on other essential needs because of the impact on income, for example. For our sector, the housing sector, the challenges are now and in the future. When we build a house will meet a need today, the current housing crisis, but it also enables people to look ahead 20, 30 years, building towns that will still be here by 2030, 2050. And we know that by 2050, in the next 30 years, there'll be major changes in the population and demographic makeup of households and communities. Household sizes are getting smaller. People's practices are changing. The population is aging. All of these environmental factors will lead to major population changes across the territory. So our issue is how will we respond to today's urgent needs while we still think about the future. So the challenge is to do those two things together. Within the sector, if I say to you what's the biggest industry in France, not many people will say that it is the town-making industry, the city-making industry. It's 10% of GDP. That's how difficult it is to think about our sector as a whole. For big problems, we need global responses. Pierre, DOURET, what would you say? What's your wish for the future? If I had one wish, it would be that we don't need charities to do essential work in our society. But I would agree with what Augustin said, that we need to continue to support people who are in need. We need to hold out our hands without pointing a finger. We need to focus on childhood, early years, because when you meet a mum coming into a soup kitchen with a pushchair and a baby, and she says, things changed here. I can remember what it was like when my mum came 25 years ago. I don't like hearing that. If we don't do anything, the baby in the pushchair will be, in 20 years, the mum that comes to the soup kitchen 20 years' time. I hope that soup kitchen won't have to exist in 20 years' time. This is what we need to focus on. We want to ensure that today's babies are not looked after children in social services in the future. So we need to provide support for children. It's about social relationships, supporting single mums. And I need to remind everyone of the importance of public authorities. Charities, people say, cost a lot of money, but they can measure what they do. When the state puts in €1 into the Restos du Coeur, 4 to 5 times more is spent across the territory. So the responsibility, as was said very clearly, is to focus on prevention and fight poverty right at the root of the causes. So investments in social causes. Let me hand over to Pierre Jacquet to wrap up for us. Thank you very much. I want to leave you with 5 ideas, 5 messages I picked up from today's discussion. The first one is that when we hear trickle down as economists, we think of wealth trickling down through society. But I feel like it's poverty that's trickling through our society. It's trickling through in a dynamic way. When people are poor, it has an impact on food consumption, on education. It has an impact that creates a vicious circle which is perpetuated over time, and the next generation suffers from it as well. So there's a perverse kind of dynamic. So poverty is not just a set of statistics we look at, it's an individual dynamic, and it can't necessarily be tackled with an overall macroeconomic approach. The second important thing that we heard is the importance of focusing on youth. This is a major theme for our rencontre here in Aix. Pour young people means that we are storing up trouble for the future. Young people are our future. We'll be endangering our society if they remain in poverty. This theme of youth is an issue not just for France, but for the world. Africa's young people are an opportunity, but also a major challenge. The third key idea is the role of business. I heard this very clearly, particularly from Augustin. Businesses are local stakeholders in society, but I also think that in the future we need to make sure that societal objectives, environmental objectives, are not only the responsibility of our governments, but are taken on as collective responsibility for all players in societies. Businesses have their own rationale, they have to make profit, but they're part of achieving our collective societal objectives. Fourth comment, even though time is running out, is the importance of the local combat, local struggle against poverty. And the final point, public development aid. Thank you to Augustin for showing how effective it is. The idea of this should be to mean that in the future it isn't needed anymore, but because times are hard, I think that such assistance mechanisms will still be needed. We need to welcome them. I'm sorry, we haven't got time for questions, but do feel free to go and see our speakers afterwards. Thank you very much.